from the podcast studio. Let me go close the door over here. Can I just say something, first of all? I know that I dressed myself today. I get that. I understand. Okay? But, like, my perception of what is an acceptable outfit isn't always reality. However, I work in an office building where I've seen a dozen people today, some that I even call my friends. And nobody said anything about the fact that I'm wearing green pants with a plaid flannel. Like, nobody said anything. They just let me live my life today dressed like this. So, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's not why I wanted to come on live. That was just a side thought. We just filmed another episode of the Broken Ish podcast right behind me. And look, I know I say this all the time. It was a banger. It was a banger. Today's guest talked about murder charge, long prison sentences, drug addiction. She talked about being addicted to the approval of others, which I thought just was like fascinating insight. You know, that's not something I think a lot of people think about or talk about. And then she also shared about homelessness, almost losing her kids, how she was able to turn her life around, and then advocates for others today. And her story of recovery was beautiful. So great episode. Can't wait for that one to come out. But also, I was going back today. We just posted a short not too long ago, and it was from the podcast that I did with Ian. And the short is called, or the podcast is called Absence of Presence with Ian and I, where we talk about grief. We talk about loss. We talk about how to cope with those. And fun fact, Ian, our COO, is an end-of-life doula, and which I didn't know until I asked him to do a podcast about grief. Turns out he was a perfect person to ask to do that podcast with me, to talk about grief. Anyway, I know the podcast episode posted like 3 weeks ago, and I haven't really thought about it since. But today we were posting a short. It's the most recent short that was posted on our YouTube page. And I was like, damn, that podcast was good. So I went back and I listened to it this morning. And like, look, they say that, you know, the only guarantee in life is death and taxes, you know? And I can tell you that I've gone years in the past without paying taxes. So, like, guarantee? I don't know. But death is a non-negotiable, right? It's something that we all will face in our relationships, in our life, you know, and there's so many different intricate ways to talk about death. I mean, you could talk about the death of a loved one, clearly, death of a pet, also devastating, sometimes more devastating. Talk about death of a career, death of a version of yourself. Like, there's so many different ways of talking about death, but grief is something that we'll all experience in life. And there's no, to my knowledge, and probably there is, because I know that series of books called like How To for Dummies exists, and it's like they have a book for everything. Tennis for dummies, a YouTube content creation for dummies. There's probably a book out there called Grief for Dummies, but I've never read it. And grief was not something that I remember ever learning or talking about in school. And also, I don't remember having a conversation with my parents about grief. It's just like one of those things that we're all going to experience. And like, for the most part, we're all unequipped to really like deal with. Anyway, I get sidetracked. Listen to the podcast this morning, which is all about death and grief. And by God, what a good listen that is. If you've ever experienced loss, if you're still struggling with grief or you're experiencing the stages of grief, like I would strongly recommend listening to that podcast episode. Again, it's called Absence of Presence with Ian and I. And then like 2 weeks later, fun fact, 2 weeks later, the podcast that we released is called Who Pays the Price for Your Ambition? And it's Chris and I talking. We actually filmed that podcast video like 3 months ago, maybe, like right after Thanksgiving, possibly. And I remember filming that podcast. And typically, our schedule is we'll film a podcast, boom, we'll get it edited, and then about 2 weeks later, typically, it'll release. Well, we filmed that podcast back in like November, maybe December. And then after we filmed it, I said, I hate that podcast. We're never going to release that. And Chris was like, what? Come on, man. We just filmed it. It was a good podcast. We should release it. And I said, absolutely not. I'm going to throw that podcast away. So I did. I basically put it in the trash. And then, like 2 weeks ago, I was cleaning up my folders and I found the podcast. And I hadn't listened to it. I'd never listened to it once. We filmed the podcast. I didn't like how I felt filming that podcast, so I sat on it. And 2 weeks ago, I found it again and I listened to it. And I immediately realized that the podcast was really good. And part of the reason that podcast was so good was because I was so uncomfortable filming that podcast. Because we're talking about some vulnerable things. Entrepreneurship, you can come on YouTube and find a million videos every day talking about entrepreneurship. One of my favorite videos to make fun of used to be like the entrepreneur, the CEO type that would like come on. Oh, I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning, and by 4:15, I already ran 7 miles, took 2 showers, and closed $6 million deals. Like those were my favorite, the motivational entrepreneur videos. But like my point is there's so much out there on like the motivation it takes to be a successful entrepreneur, and all you'll hear is about like the nice cars and the money and the discipline it takes and the bright side of being an entrepreneur. And in that particular episode that we filmed, Chris, our CEO, and myself talked about the ugly side of being an entrepreneur. And anyone that's ever started their own business or worked for themselves knows that ugly side. The long hours, the disconnection from your family and your loved ones, the stress and the toll that stress takes on your body. So yeah, we filmed it. I felt gross about it. I got super uncomfortable, got super vulnerable, shelved it. Fast forward like 3 months, found it, watched it, not emotionally tied to it, and was like, fuck, man, we have to put this out. So we released that podcast episode, which is called Who Pays the Price for Your Ambition? The Hidden Costs of Chasing Your Dreams. So I just want to come on here and mention those 2 podcast episodes. One released 13 days ago, so almost 2 weeks ago. And the other one released 3 weeks ago, Absence of Presence, Ian and I talking about grief. Whew, that was a good one. Today's podcast, also a good one, talking about a murder charge, over a decade incarcerated in prison, homelessness, addiction, almost losing your kids, losing yourself and losing everything, and then clawing and fighting your way back from the depths of despair to now be in a place of recovery where our guest is an advocate for others who are fighting through the system. So, pretty incredible episode, doing some pretty incredible things. Sorry about the green pants. I know. I'm a mess. I'm a mess. I know. I get it. I understand. And, you know, I just hope that you have a wonderful day. And, I don't know, maybe subscribe, give us a thumbs up, or leave us a good old comment. Would love to talk to you guys. And with that, I will say, I wish you well. Was it Wednesday? Wednesday. It's Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. By the way, today is International Waffle Day. I know, that's a thing that exists. Personally, not a fan of waffles. I prefer French toast. Honestly, I prefer probably pancakes over waffles too. Although like less on the pancakes. A crepe though, can we just talk about crepes? Holy cow. Crepes are the superior form of a pancake for sure. And then you put a little Nutella in that crepe. Ooh wee! That thing slaps. Anyway, it's not National Crepe Day, it's National Waffle Day, so I'll give waffles its flowers, you know? A waffle is something that people eat in the morning. And they say it's good. I guess if you throw some strawberries on it, maybe it's good. Yeah, not sure. Anyway, appreciate you guys on this Wednesday, on this International Waffle Day out here. Just doing some editing on the YouTube channel, where again, new episode, just recorded, just finished it, another banger. All the episodes, honestly, bangers. The $50 billion industry with the 90% failure rate, banger. Hope hurts. Inside the homeless epidemic, a banger. Also, I know I posted this the other day, but rest in peace, Chuck Norris. What a legend. What a guy. Gone, but not forgotten. So, I've been on here now for 13 minutes, so I'm going to head on out. Can you just cope? Yeah, we can cope. I don't know what that means. Oh, deal? Can we deal? Yeah, I could deal. But I can't deal. Duh.